I'm Gloria Groom, the Chair of Painting and Sculpture of Europe at the Art Institute of Chicago. And you're looking at the facade of the museum as it is now at Adams and Michigan Avenue with the lions in front of it. This is where we moved in 1893. The museum actually started at Van Buren and Michigan Avenue in 1879. It's a museum that is encyclopedic, but it really started out by being a museum of paintings. In 1894, we were given our first collection, which was paintings from mid-19th century and French. And that has always been our specialty since then. And because of the amazing story of Chicago coming back from the fire, having the Columbian World's Fair in 1893, all of that galvanized the city, especially the philanthropists and the collectors, to really think about modern art. And modern art was Impressionism. And so in 1893, we had collectors that were going to Paris and buying art, and eventually that art ended up in the Art Institute. So 85% of our collection of Impressionist paintings was actually from several collectors who by 1933 had given us their donation. One of the wonderful paintings that I think suggests modern art, and that is Monet, and that is his Gare Saint-Lazare. The painting of the train station, the most famous train station in Paris, the one that was the busiest because it led to the seashore where the Impressionists loved to go and paint, is in our collection. It was given to us by Martin A. Ryerson, who is a trustee of the Art Institute and amazingly involved. And that's kind of the story, is our collection was not really bought so much as given. And it's a painting that really brings you into the excitement of modern day Paris with the smoke that's inside this glass and iron structure, which was already new architecture at the time. And actually, when you go to Paris now, that's what you see when you go to train stations. And it also shows how Monet was just capturing that moment. And of course, that's what Impressionism was all about. It was the idea of not doing preparatory drawings and really leading up to a final painting, but the impression, the idea of getting something down and having it seem as if he was there and only working there, although we know he worked back in his studio. And that painting really relates to another very, very famous painting in our collection. In fact, if you say the painting with the umbrellas, they may not know the artist is Gustave Caillebotte, but they know the painting, one, because of its size, and it's on a separate wall. And interestingly enough, it's the exact same date as the Gare Saint-Lazare, and they were both shown in the third Impressionist exhibition in 1877. So it's almost 7 feet by 9 feet, and it just is one of these moments of almost stop action. And it is an intersection that's just north of the Gare Saint-Lazare, so geographically it's completely related. And it's a painting that you almost feel you can walk into. This couple that's coming towards you is nearly life-size. And it's the idea that this intersection, which has a name now, at the time it was unidentified, now it's called the Place de Dublin, of Dublin Square, is there today. You can go there, you can see the Flatiron buildings, you can see everything but the cobblestones, of course, and you can't see the people wearing their 19th century fashions, but it exists, and it's the Paris we know. It's the Paris, modern Paris, which of course was what was so attractive to these younger artists who were trying to break away from history painting. But unlike the Monet, which was given by one of our major collectors, the Caillebotte was surprisingly bought only in 1964. So it's one of the few paintings in this room of Impressionism that wasn't given by one of our patrons. And it's such a coincidence, and I don't know how it happened, but this painting, you walk around this wall, and you've seen this painting that is the centerpiece of this room, and you walk into the next gallery, and what do you see? The centerpiece of our entire paintings collection, Sunday on La Grande Jatte, 1884, by the artist Georges Seurat. So a painting that is a decade later, but that also has the characteristics of Paris Street Rainy Day by Caillebotte, in the sense that it is modern-day Parisians wearing modern fashion. They're out instead of a city street. Now they're on this island just west, just outside of Paris. And I'd love to say that Georges Seurat, who was 20 years younger than the Impressionists, must have seen the Caillebotte and been so impressed, but there is no connection. But it is coincidental that both of these major icons of Impressionism and Post-Impressionism for the Grande Jatte are in our collection. And the Grande Jatte is so special because it is really a breakthrough in modern art. At the time he exhibited in 1886, it was the last Impressionist exhibition. And what he was doing was basically turning Impressionism on its ear. He was taking the basic modern life subject matter, but he was blowing it up and making something very classical, very different than anything had been done, using a technique that he called chromoluminism, which we thankfully have changed now, and it's now known as neo-impressionism or pointillism, meaning this kind of dabs of paint in complementary colors that he laid down side by side so that the paint itself would vibrate. So instead of the light coming from, okay, I'm going to draw a sun and the sun's going to make a shadow, it came from the canvas itself with these tiny specks that would vibrate once you see them far away and you get close to them and you see how he has textured the canvas. It reproduces amazingly. It's very graphic because everything seems very clear. But when you get up close to it, which is what you should do, you really see how he starts with a more impressionist brushwork, and then he comes in with another layer of these little dabs of color, which is why it's called pointillism. And so he worked on it over a period of 3 years. It wasn't a painting that is impressionist in any manner. It is a painting that comes from over 60 drawings and little paintings called croquetons. As he said, he wanted to make art that would be in museums. He wanted to redo the Athenaeum processional of people in modern life clothing. So he was trying to do something that was almost anti-impressionist. And after this, art took a different direction. Impressionism was seen as something that was too romantic, that was too about the moment, whereas he was seen as something very classical and very going back to the tradition of painting from studies, working up to a larger scale, preparatory, and then the final painting. It's a painting that is humorous. People look at it and it's, everybody seems to be so sort of cut out, which is the way it was described at the time it was exhibited. But it's really funny. I mean, there's a nursemaid as she's over to the side. She's next to the two women that are fishing on the banks of the Seine. And she looks like a boulder or some kind of rocky thing. And it's a nursemaid wearing what we would consider like a candy striper now. And there's throughout, you see these crazy shifts in scale that's impossible that this fellow in front who's laying in a kind of sleeveless t-shirt and the man with the top hat, the little dandy next to him, there's no way that their proportions work. But it does work when you stay 6 feet from the painting. Everything falls into place and there's this sense of deep space. But it's really about the patterns and the light and dark that he's created with these shifts in colors and these tiny dots. Not only is this a painting that's a destination piece for the Art Institute, but it's also so graphic that it gets reproduced ad nauseum. It's been the subject of Ferris Bueller's Day Off. It's in a Simpson cartoon, and of course it is the only painting about which a musical has been written, Sondheim's Sunday in the Park with George. It's a painting that came to the Art Institute as the owner of the painting wrote, almost by a miracle. Frederick Clay Bartlett was another one of those great philanthropic collectors and engagers with the Art Institute. He was a trustee, and he and his wife went to Paris in 1924. And what did they find? They saw this painting and they wrote back and they said, it is the most important painting in the 19th century. And they were able to buy it. Seurat dies in 1891. It goes to one other artist, and then it is bought by Frederick Clay Bartlett. And we think it was shipped back. It never went into his home. It was too big. It comes directly to the museum in 1924, and it was given to us in 1926 with other works in his collection. So it's one of those paintings that's part of the Art Institute lore, and it will never travel. We will never move it from the Art Institute because people come to see it. It's mesmerizing and it never seems to get old. It has enough going for it. 44 people, a monkey, dogs. I mean, there's so much to see and there's so much to learn from it. Now, when I said that it was a classical painting, I was referencing the tradition of artists making sketches and drawings. And indeed, we have one of the croquetons, these little sketches, one of 26 sketches that he did for the final painting. And you can see in this little sketch how different it was. So he was kind of using these as almost like card outlines or something. So he would go to this island, this little stretch of land west of Paris, and he would sketch and he would paint, and he had this little painting box, and then he would go back in the studio where he's working on this 6 by 10 foot painting, and he would sort of use these as a kind of aide-memoire, as a sort of reference for what he was doing. So these little painted sketches were done on what they call artist board, and they were 6 to 9 inches, and he would have them in this little case that he would take. And then he'd come back in the studio and he would enlarge them onto a canvas, and he would use parts of each of these sketches. And you can see how different the Grande Jatte, the painting we have today, would have been if it had been the same trio of people rather than the elegant couple that you see in the final painting. Quite different, just certain things that he translated into the final one. So that you know it's an artist who, this was his masterpiece. And sadly, he dies only 5 years after exhibiting it at the age of 31. And so that whole idea of Neo-Impressionism kind of ends with him, but not before many, many artists had seen this shown at the last Impressionist exhibition in 1886, and it was a painting that had to be reckoned with. It was like a threshold into something new. And even an artist that we don't think about as a neo-impressionist in that same way, Vincent van Gogh, had to take it on. It was a challenge to artists like Gauguin, like the Impressionists themselves, and certainly Van Gogh, who had just come to Paris, only stayed in Paris for 2 years, was with his brother, who was an art dealer, and who sees the Seurat, Sunday on la Grande Jatte, in 1886. And what does he do? Among the 24 self-portraits he does in a short 2 years, he makes a self-portrait using the technique he interprets as pointillism. Of course, it has very little to do with the more calculated and consistent way of painting that Seurat's using. Instead, it's like everything Van Gogh does. It's got expressionism. It's going to be showing his emotional, but he's using the divided brushwork that we associate with the Seurat, and that's how he would have come upon this. And it was an experiment that doesn't go anywhere. Van Gogh is trying it, he's taking on the mantle of Seurat, and it's like, okay, that's not working. And he goes on to do something quite different, and of course he goes away from Paris to do that. Now, we consider the Grande Jatte as sort of the end of Impressionism because it was shown in their last exhibition, but also because, as I said, it was anti-Impressionist. And this painting is also a painting that was framed, we know, in a white frame. We know that it was framed a certain way, but we don't have enough information because when Frederick Clay Bartlett and Helen Birch Bartlett came back, they were on a ship. And so we don't even know if it was framed or perhaps it was rolled to be, come back with them. So we have extrapolated from a painting that's in the Barnes Foundation in Philadelphia. It's called Les Poseuses, the models, and they are standing in front of the Grande Jatte, and you can see that it has this sort of white, flat frame. And we're trying to get more of the sense of the frame that we extrapolated from the painting within the painting and get the right white, because it's not pure white. The painting with the laminated glass, and we estimate with the new frame, is going to weigh about 600 to 650 pounds. The frame is very specific because not only does it have to show the edges, because Seurat restretched his canvas and made a painted frame in 1888, so 2 years after he's shown it. But it also has to contain this laminated glass that is very thick because it's 3 layers, and it's resistant to all shock, it's UV resistant, and it is laminated so that there is no way this painting could ever suffer any kind of damage. But it's heavy. We have tried to reframe this painting several times, twice since I've been at the Art Institute. And this, I think, is going to be it. And I'm very, very pleased and excited to see the results and happy that Bank of America is making it possible. I'm Gloria Groom, and thank you very much for watching.